Hello, everybody, and welcome to Let's Clear the Air podcast at the Center for Community Action and Environmental Justice. I'm your host, Heena Singh, Communications Coordinator here, and I'm joined by my co-host.
Hey, everybody, it's Luis Carretero, Media Specialist here, also at CCAEJ.
Today, we are joined with two very, very special guests from Regenerate California. I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, this is Tyler Valdez from CEJA.
Hi, this is Heena Singh, also from CEJA.
Awesome. So today's conversation is going to be talking about your work and what you're doing at Regenerate California and CEJA in general. So let's start at the very beginning. Let's start with the origin. What is Regenerate and what is like the initiatives and the campaigns you guys are doing?
Oh yeah, I can get us started. And maybe it's helpful to also share more about CEJA. So CEJA stands for the California Environmental Justice Alliance. We are we have a lot of power across California. Like we represent 10 base building organizations across the state of California. CCAEJ being one of them.
Let's go.
And really, we represent a real force in environmental justice across the nation. Even like we really have so much people power, and really like honored to be part of such an awesome organization. We're working in a lot of different areas, including land use, climate justice, and then energy justice, which is what we're talking about today. So our Regenerate California campaign. This is a campaign in partnership with Sierra Club, includes CCAEJ, as well as CAUSE and CBE. So we're really representing lots of folks that live in like different localities across California. And really our goal with Regenerate is to retire all gas plants in California, starting with those in environmental justice communities first. And our campaign is a combination of it's policy, it's legal, it's organizing and communications. So it's really a multifaceted campaign. And I'll pass it to you, Tyler, if you maybe want to talk more about like kind of your role at Regen as well.
Yeah, thanks, Heena. That's a great introduction to our work and the campaign. I'd just like to add, with Regen, it's such a unique kind of model for a campaign and partnership. It's Sierra Club, a big green with a lot of resources and staff capacity, partnering with local environmental justice, community-based base building organizations. So including CBE, Communities for a Better Environment, the Central Coast Alliance, United for a Sustainable Economy, so CAUSE out in the Central Coast, and then of course we have CCAEJ here in the Inland Valley. And so I think there's so much power in coalitions and coalition building and creating a united front, because one organization on its own won't be able to shut down all the gas plants throughout our state. We really need to coordinate our efforts and bring together our communities, and there's a lot of solidarity for these communities living on the front lines of dirty energy infrastructure. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And it's great that you bring up that like all these organizations bring very unique insight to where they're from, right? So these solutions are not a one size fits all solution for the communities. And I mean, that plays into the whole like idea of a just transition, right? It's like, how do we be equitable to every like frontline community that's enduring these, environmental justice issues? So I guess where does Regenerate like come into play with that? Like, where are we when it comes to like a just transition? What does that look like through the lens of Regenerate?
Yeah, maybe I can take a first pass at that. For folks that aren't familiar with the Just Transition Framework, or the JT framework, we like to shorten it.
That's awesome. I've
cool.
never heard that.
Okay.
Yeah, hey, JT, that's kind of cool.
JT.
I'm gonna start using that.
And it's all about going from our current extractive, dirty, in regards to energy, it's like our extractive, dirty energy economy, and shifting or transitioning with justice as the lens to a regenerative or clean energy economy, hence the name Regenerate,
Boom.
Regenerate California. And so, there's this framework that was really spearheaded by the Climate Justice Alliance with a lot of involvement from CEJA and our member organizations as well. And for folks that aren't familiar, CJA, Climate Justice Alliance, is like the national model, of kind of like CEJA, but at a national level, bringing together different base building orgs across the country. And so they developed this framework. And I think with Regenerate, part of it is we have to fight the bad in order to go from this like nasty, extractive, dirty energy economy to a clean, regenerative economy. We need to first shut off the bad stuff, right? We have to fight it, stop it, prevent it from continuing. And then the second part of that is we have to build the new.
Exactly.
So we have to, come up with what our vision is for the future. What community-centered clean energy solutions do we want to have that help promote clean energy, better health, public health, also community ownership and governance and resilience are all parts of building that new. So Regen's really focused, I think, on fight the bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'll just add, it's interesting because actually some of the tactics that we use in our campaign to fight the bad involve thinking about what that future looks like, thinking about like what the build the new could be. And a lot of times when we're asking for gas plant retirements at regulatory agencies, like the solution that comes from these spaces is utility scale energy. And so Regenerate, actually, we have a subgroup that really focuses on what does responsible utility scale energy look like. And as part of this portfolio of clean energy solutions we want to see, like Tyler said, we want it to be community led and distributed ideally, but we might not be able to get all the way there with just that model. And so having being able to outline what responsible utility scale energy looks like, whether that's solar, battery energy storage, long duration energy storage, offshore wind. These are all the types of questions that we're also figuring out on our end, because we really see California as like this really awesome, like kind of testing ground to an opportunity to set a precedent for what like good responsible utility scale looks like.
Yeah, and I think that this is a perfect place because we're very ahead of the curve when it comes to this type of work. But I wonder what type of like challenges do we look at as like going forward? Because I think that's like a big issue. It's like we need to navigate these obstacles to get to where we need to get to, but like what are they? We need to identify them. So like what can we see identified as an obstacle moving forward for like 100% sustainable like energy solution?
Yeah. And I think something I can add to that as well is that, one of the issues I've seen is that a lot of people are saying that when it comes to that just transition, there's a higher demand for energy as it's going like further along, like throughout the years, essentially, because California as itself, we require a lot of energy, and we have to understand that like demand and how much we can supply at a certain time is a big factor when we think about these things. So that's also another perspective to that as well.
Yeah, totally. Do you guys have any insight onto that aspect of it?
I think Tyler and I were talking about this actually a couple days ago around like the challenges being some of it actually like technical grid related and some being more like political. So maybe I can talk a little bit about the grid challenges that we're seeing. I think a big thing we run into with regulatory agencies is reliability. This comes up a lot. We talk about how we want to retire these gas plants in EJ communities, and decision makers say, well, if we are in a heat wave one year, or if the grid is in an emergency situation where everyone needs power, well, then we have to keep these gas plants online. But this is actually like a myth that Regen has been working to expose, because we actually did a report in 2022, I believe it's the heat wave report, where
Correct.
we look at, and Shane, you're familiar
100% familiar
with this heat wave report that looked at the heat waves in 2022 and actually examined these 100 or so gas plants and how they operated during that time. And it was found that not only did pollution get worse because these gas plants, these old, slow polluting gas plants were like spiking up in the summer. They were also just unable to perform. They were unable to meet the demand. And so that example, that report is one of the type of tactics we're using. It's like doing our own research and communications to really educate folks on like gas plants are not the solution for reliability.
Exactly. It's wild to think that not only are they wildly inefficient, but they don't even do what they're supposed to do when they're called upon, right? It's more things like when we have to tell everyone to emergency stop with their, like, there's a word for it. I'm forgetting. It's, when you tell the community to use less energy at a certain time, and then
Demand response.
demand response. That's that was the words I was looking for. But yeah, demand response being a way better solution than having inefficient gas plants on. And in that report, you can see totally that there's a trend about these old gas plants just not living up to what they're supposed to. The only reason they were kept online in the first place was to create more reliability, and in fact, they are not reliable at all. So, great read, by the way. Read the heat wave report by Regen and CEJA. It's a great read. Tyler, do you have any input?
Yeah, and the report you can find on our website at
shout out.
CEJA.org. And I mean, I'd like to also add on to the heat wave report. I think something that stood out to me about what had happened in 2022 during that heat wave in that September was when we were about to hit peak demand and potentially have like rolling blackouts, and we all know what that means for community members. And what actually helped prevent that was the response of everyday people like us. There was an emergency text sent out to I think many Californians who all voluntarily reduced their energy consumption during this peak demand period, and that's what kept the grid stable and kept power coming to those who needed it the most. And so in many ways, it's like we are more reliable community members, and everyday people and ratepayers are more reliable than these gas plants.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, I like to highlight that fact. But adding to, there's so many challenges and barriers. Speaking a little more to like the political side, if we just look at the model that we're currently operating under, it's pretty much our electrical grid is owned by investor-owned utilities. And it's in the name in itself. It's like owned by investors, shareholders, like Wall Street. We're talking about corporations and wealthy people running our electrical grid for profit to make money off of us as ratepayers and as residents. And so, I mean, what happens right now, just step by step, it's like we extract, so we pull fossil fuels out of the earth, like coal, oil, gas, hence gas plants come along. Then it gets transported to a facility like a gas plant, where then that generation happens, where they're burning these fossil fuels, releasing carbon dioxide, other greenhouse gases, and just other air pollutants into our air. And that's generating electricity. And it's all just to like create heat to make steam that moves a turbine that spins magnets around and creates electricity. And you can think, wow, there must be so many other ways to do that. And then that electricity then travels sometimes hundreds of miles across transmission lines to even get to the communities and places that it's needed and used. So in our businesses, our homes, our schools, our churches, places of worship, it's going so many miles. And then what happens when those transmission lines get old and sag or overheated? We have wildfires.
Yep.
And so we know about the devastation that can be caused by some of these transmission lines. And if they're not upkept by the utilities, right, that own them. And then that power comes to our homes. That's when we consume this electricity. And, we just have this current model. But then what if there was another way to envision this? Like, what if we produced our own electricity on our rooftops or in our neighborhoods? Why isn't that happening more? And you can't help but ask, but who's stopping it? What are the barriers? And of course, the utilities, it directly impacts their bottom line and their profits. If community members own their own generation, electricity, got to consume it right over, in their community spaces. And so that is an incentive for the utilities to then spend millions of dollars, like literally, on misinformation campaigns, on lobbying at our legislators, convincing them to pass certain laws and influencing regulations that basically help them and benefit them to get more profit off of everyday people like us.
Yeah, and if I could add a little bit to that, you know, I had the opportunity a while back to actually attend one of Bloomington MAC meeting, which is essentially a sort of update on things that happen in the city of Bloomington, where a power company essentially held a presentation because of the constant blackout or like blackouts that were happening essentially in the community. And what ended up happening there was that because of community pressure, they did inform community that they were going to upgrade a lot of utility that is around the area. But if you really look at the map and survey where they're upgrading these, you know, new covered conduits, it's really only supporting businesses. And when I say businesses, I mean like warehousing and the warehousing industries and such. And so these communities are still not getting their covered conduit. And it really only moves at their own pace. So that's another thing that we have to take into account too, that these companies that we're talking about, they have the capacity, they have definitely the profits to do, you know, like either underground lines or just more covered conduits. But at the rate that they're doing it, it's not necessarily enough to support community at this time. And so it's always really important to keep on advocating for these kind of things as well, because we're not at the pace that we should be at, if it even comes to us having to rely on these. Because I completely agree with you. I think, you know, having an opportunity to, you know, put solar on roofs, or even I've had conversations about water collection systems when it rains and things of that sort. These are all amazing things, but they're also something that, you know, these companies are going to try to add incentives to not promote and to, you know, input false information out there.
Yeah, completely. And along those same lines, it's like these antiquated models are being kept in place just to extract more from our like Black and brown communities that suffer the most during these rolling blackouts. And like all of these expenses then get put onto the ratepayers as like an addition to also getting these things. So it's like, it's a lose-lose in this situation for underserved communities. So we want to, as Regenerate, you know, shed light on that and to come up with solutions, break down the bad, build the good type of situation. But yeah, it's there's obstacles for sure.
One thing I just want to even add, but I know we're trying to talk about solutions. One thing I do want to add is like something we've seen, and I feel like this is a very classic case of like of why we need energy justice. It's like in some of these blackout periods, like you're saying, like Black and brown folks are really impacted the most. Sometimes even when these gas plants turn on that are near their homes, they're not the ones receiving that power.
Exactly.
And so I think that's really like they're experiencing the pollution, but then they don't have the reliability.
Yep.
And like I was recently at an offshore wind conference a couple weeks ago at Port of Long Beach, where similarly, it's like, okay, all these portside communities are going to be impacted by offshore wind development, but then are they going to have the reliability that comes with more renewable energy on the grid? And so we need to make sure that the answer is yes, but also that communities involved in how this is being carried out and how are these decisions being made. So yeah, I know we're getting into solutions. So that's like exactly like making sure community is part of what that process looks like.
Yeah, totally. And on the same lines of like solutions and things, is there any type of like policy or initiatives that like Regenerate and CEJA are currently doing to like help further, you know, these solutions or like this campaign?
Yeah, definitely. Maybe I can start. Maybe it's helpful to like break it down based on like the different agencies. We're really focused on 3 agencies: California Energy Commission, or CEC, the California Public Utilities Commission, the CPUC, and then CAISO, which is the California Independent System Operator. So the first one, CEC, they are currently in the process of putting together a joint agency report for SB 100, which is like a roadmap looking at what does energy demand look like and where are we going to, which resources are we going to deploy to meet our 100% renewable energy future. And they are looking at a variety of scenarios. So one of the things that Regen has been doing is showing up to their meetings, trying to understand the different scenarios, and the assumptions behind the different scenarios to basically ensure that we're moving forward with like a no gas, no combustion scenario where at some point we'll get to this like 100% renewable energy future. So CEC is definitely like a huge. They're kind of like these three agencies work together. They have a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, and so they all kind of work together and share information, but kind of starts at the CEC because whatever they put out as the demand like projections then goes to the CPUC. And so California Public Utilities Commission, they are responsible for overseeing these like investor-owned utilities that Tyler was talking about before, IOUs. IOUs include SCE, PG&E, and SDG&E. And they make a lot of, they really operate like very like lawyerly like. Their proceedings are very like technical. We're involved in a few of them. One of them is integrated resource planning. The other is resource adequacy. But in both of these proceedings, really what we're trying to do is make sure gas plants are being modeled for retirement, where we are making sure that the assumptions going into their modeling make sense. We're making sure that they're not, they're right-sizing the reliability standard as well. They're not saying we need to be overly reliable to the point where then you're making the case for keeping gas plants online. We want to make sure, we have eyes on how these decisions are being made, because then after the CPUC makes their decisions, they go to the CAISO, which is the California Independent System Operator, that looks at all of the transmission projects across California. They look at which projects are going to be upgraded, like what are the connections going to look like, different retrofits, capacity increases to enable more renewables. So when we work with CAISO, now we're really having the conversation, okay, how is this increase in transmission in this area then going to allow gas plants to retire? Because we're able to bring offshore wind and solar and batteries in. So these are kind of like the three venues. With CAISO, we're really focused on their transmission planning process, which is coming to an end for this cycle in the next few months. And it's kind of through these venues we're operating in. And we also try to like meet with folks. We try to engage them in other settings, kind of bring them into our communities. And so maybe I can pass it to Tyler to maybe talk about, like beyond just going to them in Sacramento and on their Zoom meetings, like how else do we engage with these agencies?
Yeah, thanks, Heena. That was a great summary of all the different policies that Regenerate engages in. Because I think something to highlight here is that there are people that making decisions. You know, you're like, how did this transmission line end up in my community? Why is there a gas plant where I live? None of it was by accident. It's all by design. And I think that's a big takeaway, is like there were decisions made by people with power. And it's these agencies, right? And most of them have like maybe 5 or so commissioners who get to vote and actually decide things. But then they also are huge departments with like hundreds of employees. So when we name CAISO or PUC or CEC, it's like, it's not just a name and some like random abstract entity. It's like, it's real people. That are making decisions around our grid. So I think I also want to piggyback off of what you were saying with like organizing and the comms part. So there's all the like legal strategies and the policies that we're advocating on, but also we want to obviously have a base of community members that are educated and know how to engage. Because it's one thing to ask community to come and show up and, share their story or give testimony at these different agency meetings. But some of them are like, what is energy? Where does it come from? Can you explain my bill to me? Breaking that kind of information down so that everyday folks are able to actually engage in these really highly technical processes that Heena was outlining. And so I think that's part of the organizing. That's part of what CCAEJ does and our other member organizations. It's like bringing folks in. Then we organize all these different kinds of activities and mobilizations, whether it's an environmental justice or energy justice tour, where instead of us coming to decision makers, traveling hundreds of miles up to Sacramento to stand in front of them at their podium and give comment, we say, hey, come out to our community, see what it's like living here with all these impacts of your decisions that you're making. So it's kind of pulling them out of the ivory tower, out of their offices and into actual communities that are burdened by many sources of pollution, but especially by dirty energy. And so, yeah, we've done energy justice tours. I know in 2022, we had one out here in the Inland Valley with CCAEJ coasting. Yeah, shout out to Joaquin, who I think was one of the lead organizers, and Shane, you were here and were deeply involved. And so we bring like these decision makers and their staff to come and we bring them and connect them directly with community members. We show them different locations or sites, whether it's a gas plant, or even solutions. Like that's the important part too. It's like we don't want to only highlight the bad things. We also want to show like, hey, here's a resilience center, or here is a community solar installation. We want more of this, less of that. So yeah, that's part of the work is, we do EJ tours. We do mobilize to Sacramento, and we do virtual mobilizations where folks can call in. And then we also do a lot of narrative work, like comms work. So whether that's through like digital organizing or talking to journalists, really spreading, advancing the energy justice narrative and kind of countering the dominant narrative that's being pushed by investor-owned utilities around all these different issues like reliability
and putting out reports like the heat wave report,
report, op-eds,
And I'm excited for, I don't think you mentioned this, but coming in the pipeline is the ambassador program and having like the ability for organizations like CCAEJ to then share like these narratives and these like how these things work, because to a normal person, explaining what CPUC, CEC proceedings end up, it could be a little thick, right? But Regenerate and CCAEJ and all of our partner organizations have developed like a little bit of a program for us to start learning, right? And that's where it starts, community education, right? So I think that that's something super excited. Stay tuned. We're going to get to that eventually this year.
More coming soon.
Yeah. So, but I'm excited because all this stuff really is the answer for like dismantling this type of antiquated model. We really got to look at ourselves and really be honest and really just understand that what's happening right now isn't sustainable. I mean, plain and simple. And the reason we exist is because we're trying to find a solution for this problem. And, piggybacking off that, what are some of the actions people around our communities can take that could maybe like help Regenerate or help CEJA or, join the movement in this area, specifically about energy?
I kind of wanted to just share, like, I feel like the first thing is maybe like, if even listening to this podcast, right? It's like you're learning, like so much of this is so not publicly available. Like it is so difficult to understand these systems. And I'll just say, like, I think a lot of people have a lot of trust in like decision makers and their environment, and like things are the way they are because they work the best. And it's just not true. Like, I think when people start realizing that like these are decisions that are made by people who are not even elected, like these folks on utility boards, on like the CAISO, like these are appointed by the governor. When you realize like who's making these decisions, they don't live in your community. They don't really understand the impacts that you're dealing with. They don't understand the ramifications of their decisions. I feel like realizing that is the first step. Like realizing that actually like you have a lot of power as someone who is like a resident, someone who lives with some of these impacts, and there are venues and places for you to speak up and be heard, I think is like a really empowering, like you don't just have to deal with it. Like there are things that you can do, and there are organizations, amazing organizations like CCAEJ that you can join. And yeah, just really like tap in, because I think I think that's kind of like people in power want to stay in power. I think they don't necessarily want you to know these things, and they want you to, it's like all by design to make you feel like you don't have a voice, but you do. And like, there are ways that you can use your experience to really make a difference.
That's
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, I mean, just to echo some of that, what you just shared, Heena, it's like, yeah, so much of it's invisible. Like, folks go home, we flip the switch and expect lights to turn on, and we don't think much about it, right? But starting to just like, yeah, ask those questions to yourself, like, where does my electricity come from? And who's making this? Who controls all this? You know, I think just even building up that consciousness and awareness of the world and how it works, and knowing that you can change it, that we do have power. So it's like, yeah, it's a lot about making the invisible visible, and realizing there are, these people making decisions that maybe don't have the best interests at heart. You know, there's so many factors that go into these decisions, but they so often don't hear from community members. So it's so important to come and show up and make your voice heard. And really shift hearts and minds. Like, we can't just do this all based off of like stats and numbers and facts and maps. And a big part of it is also just shifting the narrative and changing hearts and minds. So that's where I think a lot of our community power comes in, and because there's so many people working on this, right? There's like engineers and lawyers, and like there's so many people working on our, transitioning this grid. But I think where the EJ movement comes in is like making sure that it's justice oriented, and it's equitable, and that the communities that have been burdened by dirty energy for decades or centuries are the first in line to benefit from a clean energy economy. So yeah, I mean, just to like kind of conclude on that is like, join an organization, come become a member of CCAEJ, start to ask those questions.
Like be curious about the things around you. You know, it's disheartening to see how much a lot of other outlets of media have sort of promoted this sort of isolation method that sort of is anti-community within our things. A lot of, if one thing, it started with like the invention of the car, something about having to use public transportation or even walk around or things of that sort, meet people, has become sort of it almost feels like a taboo in this day and age, where it doesn't feel like you want to talk to your community members or anything like that. And it's like you said, we have to open our hearts, open our minds to the idea that, community together is a much stronger force that can be well governing, well educated, versed in our needs, because community knows what's best for community. Not these, people who were never voted in, who just happen to have all this power now and don't even take one step into these areas that they've affected. So
100%. Yeah, we're on the front lines of pollution, but we're also on the front lines of the solutions.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Put that on a shirt.
Oh, dude.
Put that on a shirt. Yeah.
Stickers coming soon.
Yeah, merch coming soon.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything. And I think that, when I look back in history, how we got here should be a cautionary tale about like where we're going, because we are shifting into a new like model, and to not be present in the setting up of this new model would be devastating. And that's how you end up with people being extracted. So I think that we need to be, we need to be curious. I love that. You need to be curious. You need to be mindful. You need to be present, and you need to be active. And I think that our community can do that, but we have a lot of obstacles telling us not to do that. I mean, you can even look at it from like a city perspective. Like, cities are not designed for us to be together. Everyone takes their own cars to like a spot, and then it's just everyone's separated, where we can be less invested in our cars and be more invested in public transit and have more community spaces where everything's a walkable distance, but
or even bikeable. I like last week, I quite literally like rode my bike to Frisbee Park in Rialto, 5 miles, and it was all uphill. It was all uphill. I have a bike with like 12 gears, and on the 12th gear, I was still struggling.
It was smoking by the end of it.
And the whole time, like just cars just passing, like I was like, oof.
So it's like these things. It's being present, being hopeful, And on that note of being like hopeful and finding that hope in community, which is part of like CCAEJ's mission, it's like, what are we hopeful for when it comes to like this campaign, like Regenerate and CEJA and like what we're doing? Because I find like a bunch of hope in this, and like whenever I get mobilized with you guys, it's always such a like I get that fire, you know what I mean? I'm set ablaze. So yeah, if you like, what do you think moving forward?
Yeah, no, I love that. I'm just sitting on it. I'm like, wow. No, I do also feel that what you're describing, like, you know, feeling like set ablaze by the work, and also just being together in the work, right? Like you're not alone. I guess for me, like pre-CEJA, like I was definitely someone who really embraced the be curious and like challenge people and like ask the questions that are uncomfortable. And I think it's really different doing that in a community, right? Compared to just doing it on your own, being the only person that's like asking these questions. So yeah, it's just, I think what gives me hope, I think seeing that we have won things in the past, like we have been victorious before and we can do it again. Tyler and I recently went to a Community for a Better Environment, CBE. They had a screening of their documentary District 15, which you can watch on YouTube for free.
Nice.
And in the movie, which was shot like I think pre-COVID, they were talking about all of this organizing they did to enable these setbacks between oil and gas drilling and people's homes. I think it was like 1,500 or 2,500 feet. And they won, actually. Like they won the setback after like 10 years of organizing. And then all of a sudden it got repealed, and then they had to like start all over again. But like what gives them hope is like they've won it once and they can do it again. And I think that story of just like the tenacity and like organizing takes time, and it takes multiple years. And I think it also takes multiple generations sometimes. So like having a space where, you know, it's like we're able to share the wins, share what worked, what can we do better, but just like understand that it's a long-term thing that we're working towards. It's not going to be overnight, but knowing that we're kind of in it together and we're enjoying the journey. Like we're there for each other. Like we make it fun. We make it like people want to keep mobilizing together. And I think that's really, that's what keeps me hopeful too.
Yeah. To add on to that, hope, such a like radical thing these days, right? To be hopeful. But then I think about, we can always turn to our ancestors in the past and our own lineages and how we all ended up here, and knowing that like my ancestors went through a lot for me to be here doing this work. And so I feel that and I carry that with me. I think the fact that we have community, we're not doing this alone, is so important and gives me hope. You know, I look to past wins as well. There was a proposed gas plant, the Puente Power Plant out on the Central Coast, where CAUSE organizes, and you know, together we were able to stop that proposal from moving forward. And I know that kind of like sparked a lot of momentum and eventually led to the Regenerate campaign coming together. Also in 2022, the CARB scoping plan, or the California Air Resources Board scoping plan. You were there, Shane. Huge mobilization. And I mean, all along that entire year, there were so many meetings talking to decision makers. We were pushing out so much of our narrative in the media, and we, you know, showed up really strong at the voting. And I mean, one of the biggest wins from that I still think a lot about is that we got no new gas, like no more new gas capacity will be added to our grid. And so now it's like, okay, great. That's all part of fighting the bad, right? Or stopping it at least from getting worse. And now it's like, how do we shut down what we still have?
Exactly.
And I think a lot of that is going to be us still building that pressure at the state level. I think a lot of it's going to come from the local organizing and, you know, targeting specific plants, naming them, and doing it together. In community is what gives me a lot of hope. So yeah.
Totally. And it's like, I find my hope in the work we all do, right? Like when I'm with the community is when I feel hopeful. And you're right. The scoping plan was huge. And it's like seeing us finally getting acknowledged by decision makers and finally getting a seat at the table. And then like, as Regenerate being more known, like on that type of level also gives me hope, because it's from that power that we now have a foot in the door, skin in the game, whatever you want to call it. It's like, I've seen it work. And then I just like sharing the message to all my community members, like, it works. It's working. They wouldn't try so hard to shut us down if it wasn't working. So,
That's
you know, and it's that stuff that I latch on to. But yeah, let's go ahead and we're gonna wrap it up. I just want to say thank you so much for coming out and sharing your experience. How can we learn more about Regenerate and CEJA?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having us. This has been really lovely and wonderful. For listeners, definitely like you can reach out to me or Tyler. We can share maybe our emails in the description, or we can.
I'll edit. I'll edit that in.
Yeah, he's gonna be like,
Oh yeah, like right here.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can also check out our website to learn more. But definitely, open to answering any questions that folks have about our work. And
A website, do you have a URL that's like off the top of your head?
CEJA.org.
Yeah, www.ceja.org.
Perfect.
CEJA. And you can sign up for our newsletter too. We send out a monthly newsletter with different calls to actions and ways that people can like really tangibly get involved and support a lot of the regen mobilizations.
Yep. Also follow on socials, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
So-
At CEJA Power.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. I'll put it right here too.
Yeah.
Again, thank you so much for coming out, and thank you guys for listening.
yeah,
We'll see you next time.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.